Recording in progress.
Good morning. Elizabeth May, Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands, joined here by Mike Morrice, Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre. We both are with the Green Party in the House of Commons, and I'm at the moment leader, and my deputy leader, soon-to-be co-leader, Jonathan Pedno, will be joining us later, but not at this press conference, later in Ottawa. Look, I appreciate your interest. Merci pour l'attention sur les questions clés d'aujourd'hui pour le Parti vert du Canada. Aujourd'hui, il y a 5 ans, le Parlement du Canada a voté que nous sommes dans une situation d'urgence climatique. This is actually the 5-year anniversary of the Parliament passing a motion brought forward by then Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, June 17th, 2019, that Canada faces a climate emergency. I have to say, since then, although it's not the subject of an entire press conference, but could be, the Government of Canada's actions are inconsistent and contradictory. In any case, I did want to mark good news today, and I'll also ask Mike to speak to this. On Thursday, June 13th, my private member's bill for environmental justice and to confront environmental racism cleared its final step in the Senate of Canada, receiving third reading. So je veux dire grand merci à tout le monde qui a donné leur appui, leur effort en faveur du projet de loi 226. Maintenant, il est presque la loi du Canada. In another couple of days, we expect royal assent to take place. This will be the third piece of private members' legislation I've brought forward that has become the law of Canada. But as often is the case, such as when my first bill on Lyme disease went through, passing the law is not the end of the fight and the effort. A huge thank you on Private Members Bill 226 to the original sponsor, Lenore Zan, whose bill died on the order paper. Then she was defeated in the 2021 election. It's been a long struggle to get this bill passed. I appreciate the support of Minister Guilbeault, of the Liberals and NDP and Environment critic Laurel Collins in getting the bill through the House. It's not a small thing. And then in the Senate, enormous gratitude to Senator Mary Jane McCallum, Winnipeg, who is of Cree ancestry and who did an extraordinary job in getting it all the way through the Senate and now on the verge of royal assent. We're extremely pleased, but it does create an obligation on the Minister of Environment to bring forward a national strategy to confront environmental racism. Just for context, the United States Environmental Protection Agency has had such a program since 1994, as responding to some of the social media commentary to which I should not respond, but the notion that I invented environmental racism as a new topic or that it's somehow woke. The United States Environmental Protection Agency and Canadian academics from forever, but particularly thanks to Dr. Ingrid Waldron, whose work in the book, Something in the Water, the film documentary by Elliot Page of the same name. There is no doubt that Canada has had a problem with environmental racism for decades, and taking action is now required of the minister. But the bill couldn't dictate exactly what kinds of action we will take. So we'll be staying on top of this to push for, as people have from Ganasatagi to Amjanong First Nation to Grassy Narrows, to racialized communities like Shelburne, Nova Scotia, or Sydney, Cape Breton, is not solved by passing the law. There's a lot more work to do. I'm going to turn to Mike Morrice now for a few comments on 226 and then back to the report on foreign interference, if that's all right with everyone, just to keep things bunched by topic.
Well, yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Of course, thrilled to see the third green law now pass, thanks to Elizabeth's efforts and that of so many others in this House, as well as she noted, Dr. Ingrid Waldron and so many advocates that over so many years pushed for this legislation. And here I know in this House worked across party lines to make it happen, to compel this government to act, to address the reality of environmental racism in this country. I'll also just briefly mention I was not elected at the time when this Parliament passed a motion to affirm that, yes, indeed, we are in a climate emergency, and neither was I here when then days later this government completed a transaction to buy the Trans Mountain Pipeline. But I was certainly part of the folks across this country who were just so deeply, deeply disappointed with the hypocrisy of these actions. It was a big part of my decision to run for office in 2019, and now as the MP for Kitchener Centre, will continue to call on this government to get rid of the hypocrisy and to act like they understand the emergency we are in, because years later, well, the price tag now is over $34 billion to expand this leaky pipeline. Actions like this are what the UN Secretary General calls moral and economic madness. And as Greens, we will continue to stand up to it at this precious moment in time where we have an opportunity to turn the corner on the climate crisis still. Those are funds that should be going directly to measures that would make life more affordable for Canadians and help us tackle the climate crisis, whether it's investments in public transit, in high-speed rail, in incentives for homeowners to retrofit their homes. Those are the dollars we should be using if we were to act like we understand the emergency that we are in. I'll pass it back to Elizabeth.
Merci, Mike. Et je pense que tout le monde a peut-être dans les questions sur le sujet de leur rapport sur the situation d'ingérence des gouvernements étrangers, the question of how much interference in Canada's democracy is taking place due to hostile actions by foreign governments, and what to make of what is being reported in some quarters, but I don't think it is a contradiction, between what Mr. Singh thought when he read the report and what I thought when I read the report. I will just make it clear the only reason to raise this again is to emphasize how much I believe that leaders of the opposition parties and of Prime Minister and all members of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, all of whom have received top-secret security clearance and who represent most of the parties in the House of Commons, as well as some senators from independent positions. I think we'll make progress when we can sit down together and discuss it together, such that if there are differences of interpretation, we can get into details and discuss them, which we can't do in news conferences, which we can't do on the floor of the House of Commons, without risking trespassing into areas of intelligence that we must respect have to remain top secret. Reading that top secret report, I didn't share this, what the experience is you go into a very small room. Well, it doesn't have to be very small, but it is a secure location. You don't bring your staff, no staff allowed, no cell phones allowed, no electronic devices, no pen, no paper, no note-taking, and obviously you don't take the top secret document out of the room. So it's an exercise that requires some rigor and careful attention to detail, which is why I am concerned about the potential for back and forth between one person in one party saying one thing, another person in another party saying a different thing. We need to be very careful as people in political life that in handling allegations of foreign interference, we put Canada first always and recognize that those who'd like to undermine our democracy would take great pleasure in seeing us chase our tails and keep trying to find names and look for, use the word traitors loosely. I will not do that, but I do appreciate very much the clarification from Mr. Singh's office, which I don't think got as much attention as kind of what I think may have been a misinterpretation of his comments. But this is from a CBC story. A party spokesperson later said that Singh's comments should not be taken as confirming or denying that any parliamentarians cited in the report are currently serving. And that's where I think when you look at what each of us has said about the report, we haven't said different things. Our feeling of if I'm relieved and he's more upset, that's a subjective question. How was he feeling before he read the report? I was plenty alarmed before I got to read the full report. And the greater context that it provided and the information contained within it was really helpful to me. And I don't change anything I already said, so I won't repeat it. But I do think that it will be helpful for all of us as parliamentarians when, and I'd like to say when and not if, the leader of the official opposition seeks his top secret security clearance, reads the report. It's a rigorous process, as I said. You can't bring anything with you. You sit down. It took me 3.5 hours to read it through carefully twice to be able to be sure that what I was saying was correct and didn't in any way infringe on the intelligence operations of Canada's intelligence and security establishment. And I did verify what I was saying would be within those confines before speaking publicly. I, again, am going to be very cautious today, but I think it's important for Canadians to know that we can work together, that we can set partisanship aside, and I hope we can do so as soon as possible.
Ms. May, you said in your remarks just now that you think sort of the people who are attempting foreign interference would love to see you chasing your... Isn't that what's happening? Aren't they actually succeeding in what they were trying to do?
I hope not. I hope that by returning to the question of, because the appearance was being created through the lack of detail, and I have to say I have nothing, I'm going to repeat it again, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians have done an extraordinary job. They went through 33,000 pages of intelligence information and produced a report to which members of Parliament from the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and independent senators could all agree. And they made it very clear that there's a real threat of foreign interference in our democracy, that MPs across all party lines are being targeted. And they made it very clear that there was, in the public version, they made it clear there's at least one example of someone who's no longer serving in Parliament who proactively engaged with foreign operatives. I think it's really important, and I think the press conference I gave last week helped Canadians feel relieved as well that there is not in the top secret security document an allegation or intelligence to suggest that currently sitting MPs have proactively betrayed their government in the sense, and their country, in the sense of the individual that's referenced on page 26 of what was already a public document. I hope that helps. I do urge my colleagues to be cautious in, I know Mr. Blanchet is going to be reviewing the document. I think it's important to, and this was confirmed as well by comments from the chair of the committee, David McGuinty, who, as I said, the committee's done a terrific job, and David McGuinty said words to the effect of, I think it will behoove us to stop looking for names of individual MPs and focus our attention and our attention and our work collaboratively together. And what David McGuinty described as having an adult conversation, I think that conversation has to happen in a secure location where we all have top secret security clearance and can discuss things with each other without a media lens. I think when we do that, we can continue the work that actually puts in place the kinds of protections we need. We acted quickly to pass Bill C-70. But since a lot of the vulnerabilities that are identified in this intelligence work of where do foreign governments see an opportunity in Canada to interfere in our democracy are in internal political party rules. And that's a question for all of us as leaders of federal political parties. Could we agree that we want to see our rules tightened up before the 2025 election? Those are like, political parties are basically like private clubs. Our legal status is unincorporated associations. It's not far off sporting clubs, or there are very few we're not a corporation in the sense that political parties can, for instance, contract. So we have chief agents. Anyway, not to dive too deeply into this, but it's our job as political parties to ensure that our internal political party rules are as rigorous as possible to avoid foreign interference.
On that issue, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Just none of the political parties seem very seized with that internal process when it comes to nominations and that kind of stuff. What does that say to you about how seriously they're taking foreign interference?
In order to create the opportunity for that adult conversation, I'm working very, very hard to do two things. One is not to reveal anything I read in the top secret report, and the other is not to take any shots, cheap or reasonable towards other party leaders, because if we can create the space for an adult conversation, it would be best not to say, this tells me that they're, you know, I'm not. I think that we all, I think, as increasingly, thanks to the work of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, I would say we are all more aware now, more seized with the threat of foreign interference than we were, certainly, than we were a year ago. And I think probably even more than we were 2 weeks ago.
Does that work with political parties have to happen from the parties themselves, or is that something that should be something that all parties have to do through sort of the work of Parliament?
Look, the Elections Act has already beefed up things quite a lot. In 2006, when I ran for leader of the Green Party, it was the first leadership contest that had any requirements from the Elections Act to report political donations. Put it the other way, the last leadership race where nobody knew who donated to make sure that the Conservative candidate who won would be successful was the time Stephen Harper was elected leader of the party that he led at that time, which was not yet called the Conservative Party. We know from this report, the public version, that leadership contests are another place of real vulnerability. We know that there was foreign interference in the leadership, the most recent Conservative Party leadership race and the one before that. The Elections Act can get at a lot of it, but we can move more quickly, and certainly well, look what happened with Bill C-70. When you get parties agreeing, this is important, we need to move quickly, legislation can be adopted. And I have to say, I think we moved a bit too quickly on C-70 because it would have been, I think, good for a number of reasons to have had an opportunity to study it in committee. But when we move together, we can move quickly in Parliament. And when we are committed to hyper-partisanship and obstruction, things don't move at all. So yes, I think, yes, parties have responsibility. Yes, Parliament as a whole could pass amendments to the Elections Act that says all party nomination proceedings must ensure that anyone voting in a nomination contest is a citizen of Canada and lives in the electoral district for which the nomination is taking place. But again, talking together will move faster than still being in opposite corners sparring.
Ms. May, just on the difference between Mr. Singh and yourself's interpretation of this, I know you talked about the former MP on page 26 of the report, but I want to read you something that he said, and I want your view because you've read the unredacted report. This is a quote from him. "There are a number of MPs who have knowingly provided help to foreign governments, some to the detriment of Canada and Canadians." Do you agree with that statement based on what you have read?
As long as one accepts the correction or clarification from his office that he's speaking of past and not current, then both of our interpretations can stand together without being contradictions.
So the issue with his remarks, I'm just trying to find where the daylight is here. Is it just on the traitor comment? Like, what are your specific differences between that?
What you just read as an interpretation is not something with which I would disagree as long as we're not solely focused on current MPs.
Go ahead, please.
And the other part of it is, as I said in my first statement on this matter, and just to go back to my exact words, there's no question that beyond the question of proactive outreach to a foreign government, certain, and I described it initially as fewer than a handful of current members of Parliament, have allowed themselves, and again, going back to the original comments from CSIS, semi-wittingly, or wittingly, allowed themselves to become compromised. I said at the time, they have been beneficiaries of foreign governments interfering in nomination contests. I stand by that, and Mr. Singh, I think, is not saying something entirely contradictory, although he's more willing to use words about unethical or potentially criminal. I don't think those words apply. But again, differences between our views of how we react, how we interpret, and what is in the unredacted full report are really very, very small indeed.
On that point, sorry, go ahead. No.
OK. Madame, et justement, sur le même sujet, M. Singh, lui, a dit « Je ne suis pas soulagé » ou « Je ne suis pas rassuré ». Vous avez dit « Je suis rassuré, je suis soulagé » ou en anglais « I'm relieved ». Il a dit exactement le contraire en anglais et en français. Donc le sentiment ou l'impression avec laquelle il ressort, est-ce que ça, c'est contradictoire à votre sentiment? Et comment vous l'expliquez? Avez-vous parlé à M. Singh de
Non.
ça?
Oui, merci pour la question. Mais non, je ne vais pas avoir l'occasion de parler avec M. Singh. J'ai hâte pour le moment d'avoir une conversation. Mais alors, c'est une question tout à fait subjective. Moi-même, je suis tellement... j'ai beaucoup d'inquiétudes avant le moment que j'ai lu le rapport. Je n'ai aucune idée le sentiment de M. Singh avant le moment qu'il l'a lu. It's a subjective question. I was, as I've described it, I think I use the words plenty freaked out at the idea that I could be serving in a chamber with people I know across party lines, that any one of them would be prepared to sell out their country to a foreign government. So that's where I was. I was up here. And I read the report. I was really relieved. I don't know if Mr. Singh was really alarmed or became more alarmed. I'm not going to say for one moment, I'm not going to contradict his emotions. How could I? He experienced what he experienced. I experienced what I experienced. The key question is, on reading the report, did we see different things? I don't think so, not from what he said publicly. I'd love the opportunity in a secure location to discuss with him in private. We can't even have our staffs in the room based on the restrictions around top secret security clearance to discuss what we really read and saw. I went through the report carefully. As I said, I read it. It took me 3.5 hours. C'est une expérience très rare d'être toute seule dans une chambre avec un rapport sans accès pour prendre les notes, pour faire un copie. C'est pas possible, mais toujours je prends le rapport public et faire une comparaison entre le rapport secret, le rapport public, pour mieux souvenir les différences entre les deux. So for me, I've done this before, once I had the top secret security clearance that I got last summer. My first experience of going into a secure location organized by Privy Council Office security analysts is an unusual one, and you can only read and you can't take notes, and I knew to take my time and go slowly. So that's all I can say is I'm confident with what I read. On the other hand, I don't have notes. Neither does Mr. Singh. It's an interesting experience and rigorous mentally to do that. And I don't want to, for any reason at all, create impressions for Canadians that Mr. Singh and I disagree on the contents. And I also want to confirm again the hard work of the individual parliamentarians to go through 33,000 pages of the same kind of effort that I went through to read one report.
There is no doubt that this report has undermined confidence in Parliament, in MPs. How does Canada and how do Canadians move forward if they're never going to find out exactly what we're talking about here?
They can't, look, if this is one important point, and thank you for raising it. I've seen in the media some people saying, well, publish the whole report. Let me be very clear, that can't be done without jeopardizing intelligence assets. In other words, there's sources of information that and there's more than one entity looking at security and intelligence information. There's CSE, there's CSIS, there's RCMP, and then, of course, we're also looking at the role of Global Affairs Canada and being concerned about what our operations are overseas. The work of diplomats involves, in every country, Canada's diplomats work to build relationships. They talk to congressmen and they talk to members of parliament in other countries. We don't want to create such a chill around normal diplomacy that isn't interference, that we compromise the diplomatic muscle of Canada. There's a lot of different elements to this in terms of the bigger context. But again, the whole report can't be made public without endangering even people's lives. So that's number one. I think we'll make progress when, as David McGuinty has said, we have that adult conversation. every party leader, get your top secret security clearance. It's now been made available to us. And by the way, this is the first time in Canadian history, of which I'm aware, when every political party leader in the House, every opposition party leader has been offered the opportunity to seek top secret security clearance. There's no guarantee you'll get it when you seek it. You put through quite a lot of rigorous questioning about your loyalty to Canada and your history, etc. But let's assume that what I'm seeking and what David McGuinty has suggested would be helpful, where all of us as federal party leaders have our top secret security clearance. We've all read the report under the conditions of rigor that are required, and then privately have a conversation with each other and with our colleagues who are on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and actually discuss what we know, what we don't know, what we can share with Canadians, with the overarching goal of sharing as much as possible to repair damage to the reputation of Parliament, so that Canadians can have confidence that their elected members of Parliament are loyal to Canada first and foremost. And again, we have to take other steps as parliamentarians, and this will be more difficult because there's federal jurisdiction, and then there's what do we do about foreign interference in other orders of government, municipally, provincially, and so on, which are also have been referenced publicly and in the public version of the report. We need to do a lot more to take, and so again, when I say I'm reassured, and I saw my friend Terry Glavin, who's a friend from Vancouver Island, he said, well, I'd said there's nothing to worry about. Let me be really clear, there's a lot to worry about. There's a lot to take seriously. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that the Green Party doesn't take foreign interference seriously. We take it very seriously indeed. But there's no reason to create an atmosphere of McCarthyism, sort of a witch hunt feeling of which MP can be trusted. I trust my colleagues in Parliament, some of whom should have shown more sense than to accept, but did they know in advance? We don't know. We're still in the semi-wittingly, unwittingly. What did they know when they started seeing busloads of people show up at a nomination meeting? That's a separate question. Did they deliver a quid pro quo to a foreign government to get those busloads of people? Not from anything I've had access to reading.
Madam Mayor, can I just ask you? Okay.
Just briefly to add, and maybe to give Elizabeth a moment to take a drink of water, I just want to respond your question about, well, why not just publish the full unread?
Why not publish the whole report?
Sorry,
that's not what
names.
I asked. I just said, how do we move forward if Canadians don't have confidence and we don't know exactly what we're talking about here?
Right. So I think part of the answer to this question is about this is why we elect people in this country, is that we trust folks as elected leaders in this country to take on this important work. And some of those MPs
right now potentially stand accused of what some have called treason. So
let me get back to this. This is why I will be firmly clear again in saying that I read the full unredacted report. The word treason does not apply to any current sitting MP, at least in the unredacted report of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. And they went through 33,000 pages of intelligence information to come to that conclusion. Canadians can have confidence, as I said, at most a few of our colleagues currently serving are potentially compromised by foreign interference. But there's no information of which I'm aware that suggests what occurred in the one instance, which I still think should be investigated, and that name should be known, and there might be, unless that intelligence information was false, and we always work in our system of justice. It's very important to maintain the presumption of innocence. Anyone accused of a crime must have the opportunity to defend themselves, have due process, et cetera, et cetera. But if, so there's an underscoring the if, what the intelligence information about the former MP described publicly here at, just to make sure I stick to the language used, that a former MP, a particularly concerning case of a then member of Parliament maintaining a relationship with a foreign intelligence officer, and again the source is, according to CSIS, the Member of Parliament sought to arrange a meeting in a foreign state with a senior intelligence official and also proactively provided the intelligence officer with information provided in confidence. I will say again, clearly having read the full unredacted version of the committee's work, this is a unique example. This is not a general broad brush across anybody but this one individual in terms of that kind of description, of that kind of not just coziness with a foreign government, but willing to sell out Canada and provide information that they had received in confidence, and as a sitting MP at that time, hand it proactively to a foreign intelligence officer. Again, that is not, there's case studies in here, and there are some examples where you say, well, as a group, and this isn't a criticism of any MP, and sometimes when you read a lot suddenly or too quickly, they could conflate. Every single party, numerous MPs have been targets of foreign interference. That doesn't mean they're participating. It means, like Michael Chong, target of a foreign government trying to intimidate them or their family, targets. So again, there's no other example that's even close to the fact set that is provided on page 26 of the report about a former member of Parliament, not even close to attaching itself to any current sitting members of Parliament.
But you're saying, Ms. May, that there are potentially colleagues who are serving with you that are potentially compromised. Do you view, based on the unredacted report, that their behavior is unethical? I know you don't want to say criminal, but unethical.
And this is, again, a matter of interpretation and judgment, not disagreeing on the facts as they exist, because I think they're pretty well understood. And certainly the one example that's very public is the case of Han Dong and that his nomination efforts were, according to the public version of this report, that he received significant assistance from the People's Republic of China and their United Front Work Department and so on. It's not at all clear from the public report that he was aware in advance. So you can ask yourself, should someone have known? Then the question of ethics is, I would say, murkier than to make a strong statement of behavior was unethical. Again, potentially compromised? Yes. Was it unethical in terms of, was it knowing? Was it unwitting? Was it semi-witting? I'm sorry I'm not trying to obfuscate, but I'm being... this semi-witting or witting language is not particularly helpful, but that's what we have from the intelligence information that was obtained through the work of our government in the sphere of basically spy versus spy. It's not the world I'm used to, but things that my concern about ethics is that our commissioner for ethics, the code of ethics and the ethical transgressions of an MP, do not codify working with a foreign government or testifying against your own government in a secret tribunal. It's not considered unethical. So I think our ethics code, and the committee's pointed to the same thing, the ethics code needs to take into account foreign interference, and in that sense, it's really impossible to comment on, well, there's two uses of the word unethical. One is codified, and one is common sense. But if you...
common sense, though, Ms. May, like, common sense-wise, would you, if you did these things, and of course I'm not saying that you would have, but would you think that that is unethical from Elizabeth May's perspective, not from the commissioner?
Since I'd never do them, I don't know if it's just not being stupid or not being unethical or just... I don't know. I'm a straight-up kind of person, and I've always... I wasn't in this room, but I was in a previously named Charles Lynch Press Theatre when in May 2006 I announced I was going to seek leadership of the Green Party of Canada. And I remember saying to the journalists there that my goal was to tell the truth all the time. I hope I've stuck to that, which means that what I think doesn't really matter about that current fact set. I think they're potentially compromised. I think one of the things that comes out of these reports is in terms of what CSIS and other intelligence officers do in terms of risk minimization. One of the things to minimize the threat and risk minimization includes such things as briefing the individual involved. I think if a CSIS agent comes to chat with you and says, do you realize you've been too cozy? That's one thing. But if it was the ethics commissioner that already has the right to haul any MP into the ethics commissioner's office and say, you filled out your financial thing here and you say you don't have any conflicts of interest, but we've figured out that your spouse has shareholdings in the company where you made a decision. There's an ethics code that makes it very clear when you're going to find an ethics violation. And at the moment, that ethics code is silent as to foreign interference, and I think that needs to be fixed. But again, dumb, unethical, foolish, you can use a number of terms for allowing someone to show up and help you win your nomination. If you weren't asking questions, you should have ought to have thought, do I want to accept help from somebody? But we have a lot of examples, particularly in leadership races going back a long time, back to 1983, that the interference of foreign money from Europe defeated Joe Clark in that conservative leadership race. It's a long time ago, and I don't think we didn't in 1983. Well, actually, we didn't know in 83. We found out when the Fifth Estate did research into Karl-Heinz Schreiber's role in the conservative leadership contest in Ottawa in 1983. It strikes me as not significant now because of what happened in 83, but what didn't happen since 1983, which was to pay attention to leadership contests within political parties and say, we ought to have some very strict rules about the extent to which people who are not entitled to vote in Canadian elections can influence the choices of who's on the ballot.
Vous avez dit, j'aimerais savoir une question en français,
Oui.
s'il vous plaît.
Pardon.
Madame May, vous avez dit tout à l'heure, il y a deux choses auxquelles je fais attention. Et parmi ces choses-là, c'est de ne pas m'en prendre à un autre chef de parti. Vous faites attention à ça. Est-ce que c'est aussi un appel que vous faites en quelque sorte aux autres chefs de parti en disant ça? Parce que, par exemple, M. Blanchet, lui, dans une déclaration écrite, a critiqué ce que vous avez dit,
oui,
vous, publiquement, et ce que M. Singh a dit publiquement, et ça lui semble pas en respect avec... Donc, il y a ça, mais est-ce que c'est aussi un appel que vous faites pour le futur?
Oui. Non, oui. Merci pour la question. Oui. Pour moi, je pense que tous mes collègues, les chefs des autres partis, ont le droit de leur opinion vers mes mots, les choses que j'ai faites comme chef de Parti vert du Canada. J'ai fait les choses dans un cadre où je veux soulager le public canadien pour rétablir, c'est dans le passé, un niveau de confiance dans notre démocratie. Pour moi, la menace de nuire la confiance des citoyens du Canada dans notre démocratie, c'est un risque, c'est une menace grave. Mais quand même, M. Blanchet a le droit de ses opinions, absolument. Même pour M. Singh, même pour M. Poilievre. Je pense que la chose la plus importante, c'est de travailler ensemble. Quand même, nous avons les grandes différences, mais c'est possible. Je reste je reste tellement engagée pour trouver une façon de travailler ensemble. Yes, sorry.
Pierre Poilievre, of course, he is still refusing to take the briefing.
There's no briefing.
Sorry, to read the unredacted report.
Yes.
But his office is saying that he's willing to take a briefing from CSIS if there's something in the report that he should read. Apparently there's a threat reduction measure that could brief opposition leaders or political leaders like him. So based on what you read in the report, the unredacted report, is there something that he should be briefed on? Is there something that CSIS should brief him on based on what you read?
I'm just going to double check how much is in the public version of the report. So I'm sorry, David, for taking a moment here again to just double check because I'm quite certain it is in the public version. And I don't want to, again, this is why, to Mr. Blanchet's point, j'ai pris beaucoup de soin entre les deux versions, les versions publiques et les versions tellement secrètes. Alors, je trouve, je cherche les mots parce que okay, this is what the sentence I was looking for, just to make sure. So, foreign actors, this is page 32 of the public report. Foreign actors also targeted party leadership campaigns. And then there's a chunk here that's been redacted and removed, which I did get to read. The 3 sentences were deleted to remove injurious or privileged information. The sentences described 2 specific instances where People's Republic of China officials allegedly interfered in the leadership races, plural, of the Conservative Party of Canada. And then paragraph 73, paragraph deleted to remove injurious or privileged information. Paragraph described India's alleged interference in the Conservative Party leadership race. So I'm only highlighting that to the extent that I think Mr. Poiliev would be interested to read the unredacted version where those sentences. If I were Mr. Poiliev, I'd read that and think, I better see the sentences that were removed. Well, I'm asking him again, publicly, to get his top secret security clearance, to request it. I mean, you can't just get it. You don't have it by right. You have to go through a clearance. I'll reveal to you the one time they said, is there any allegiance you have that would be beyond your allegiance to the government to Canada, to your country? I wasn't being coy with them. I said, yes, I consider myself an earthling. That's my one allegiance greater than my allegiance to Canada. I still got my top secret security clearance, which I'm relieved to know. But it's not easy. So I would ask Mr. Poiliev to go through the process. I know he's busy. It takes a lot of time. I mean, there's a lot of things on the other leaders' plates, and I understand that. But it takes some time. It takes concentrated effort. It allows other people to go around. They do interview other people in your background and so on. But he might. Why not?
He has his reasons, right? He doesn't want to be gagged. Or
well, you're not gagged. As you can see, I'm careful but not gagged.
Like, did you read anything in that report?
To answer that might be revealing more than I'm prepared to reveal. I'm saying just clearly that if we all, as political party leaders in this country, and I think it's an obligation of leadership to seek to know more than to know less. So knowing more and having greater context helps all of us talk as clearly as possible to Canadians. I'm not gagged, but I'm careful. And I do want Canadians to have confidence that we as elected people can work together. And I think they've shown themselves, the individual members of Parliament on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians are an inspiration. Don Davies of the NDP, sitting down with Alex Ruff, Conservative Member of Parliament, and David McGuinty, Liberal, and Stéphane Bergeron, Bloc. Extraordinary commitment to Canada that these MPs have displayed. And I really want the rest of us to meet their example. And when I say the rest of us, other party leaders, M. Trudeau, M. Poiliev, M. Blanchet, M. Singh et moi-même, de parler ensemble dans la chambre avec les choses de prévenir les violations vers les secrets de notre pays, l'intelligence de notre pays, we could work together and make a lot of progress. And it's true that Mr. Poiliev has his reasons, and in those reasons, he's supported by no less than the former leader of the NDP, Tom Mulcair, who says he's right. He shouldn't take a briefing. But I'm going to continue to say that we should all, with the goal of being able to, we're almost at the end of this session of Parliament. I really hate the idea of Canadians having a whole summer of barbecue season, not certain of whether I'm on solid ground. to reassure Canadians that no one currently sitting in Parliament could ever be considered to have done anything treacherous, traitorous, or treasonous, period.
On that point about the committee itself, the Prime Minister in Italy brought up you specifically this weekend, and he said the difference between Mr. Singh and your approach in reading of this underscores why he can say, and he said it twice, that he has concerns about the way the committee interpreted the information. Do you have any concerns about how the committee compiled or read that information? Because he seems to be saying that on some things, and he won't say what, they are wrong.
Okay, bearing in mind that the Prime Minister has access to far more information than I do. Again, the committee read 33,000 pages of intelligence information to which I didn't have access. I only had access to the unredacted final report prepared by all those MPs. This is a perfect example of why I would love to have that adult conversation where I'd be in a position to say to the Prime Minister, well, what part about it didn't you think was a fair interpretation? That kind of conversation would be very helpful. And I'm not going to take any shots at the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Official Opposition or anybody, frankly. I think we need to work together so that Canadians know we can. I think that's important. And that on something as important as other countries deliberately trying to interfere with our democracy, the best way to tell other, particularly hostile actors interested in undermining Canadian democracy, that they better get their asses out of Canada, is that we work together, we pull together, and we are a solid front against foreign interference. We can't do that until everybody's read the report, has the same information, and can sit down and talk to each other quite openly, setting aside assumptions and biases, and just say, you know, okay, Pierre, what did you think when you read it? And Justin, why are you questioning the way they interpreted it? Because let's face it, the Prime Minister does have access to all that information through various briefings and through various security and intelligence services. And again, if you're in the Prime Minister's situation, one thing about context here, on one hand, I agree with the committee in saying Prime Minister should have acted faster. But I read it and I think, oh, okay, so the larger context here, and this comes across in the public version of the report on the final decision to expel the PRC representative in Toronto, where CSIS had been saying for some time that person ought to be booted out of Canada. And Global Affairs Canada said, that's a nuclear option, don't do that too quickly. Again, larger context. If you're a Prime Minister, you're getting advice from your senior diplomatic service and your Minister of Foreign Affairs saying, and I'm just imagining this, okay, I'm going to draw a big line here so I'm not saying, this is nothing from the report. I'm just saying when I read that and I think of the context, I'm speculating, okay, clearly speculating, nothing I read in any report. But if you're a Prime Minister and your Minister of Foreign Affairs says, if we do that, there'll be a reciprocal punishment from country X against our diplomats, it could compromise our ability to achieve this goal for Canada or that goal for peace in the Middle East. We're negotiating, we're doing this, we're doing that. Our diplomatic service needs to be protected from other countries doing a tit for tat. I stand back from everything without full information. If I've got more context by far from having access to the unredacted report. I have nothing but respect and gratitude for the work that's done by all of our intelligence operatives, our diplomatic services, national security advisors to the Prime Minister, and to all the apparatus of what it is to be Canadian and try to operate in the world where I think Canada's historical role in the world has always been to punch above our weight. As Lloyd Worth actually said, to use soft power. I love Canada, and I love what we could do in the world, and I know we could do more if all the leaders of all the parties read all the information to which they have access and were willing to meet privately without media, no offense, and actually share what we've learned and figure out where our points of differences are and maybe figure them out.
But do you think it's a proper thing for the Prime Minister to do, to say that the report is wrong, but provide no examples of what is wrong with it?
He can't provide examples if he has access to security information beyond what he's allowed to talk about.
He's provided more information than what is in the report. He could say something that is not classified, but give details on what he thinks is problematic, more so than saying nothing. Could he not?
I don't know that I would wish that all of us could stay more or less on the same song sheet. I know that's wishing for things that are really hard. We're less than a year and a half from an election. The closer we get to an election, I think the harder it's going to be to pull together. And as Canadian leaders of various political parties actually work together to fix, to take the steps that need to be taken urgently to ensure that we preserve and protect our democracy against hostile actors. That's critical, and it's not yet being done adequately at multiple levels of our democracy in multiple spheres. From, again, it was a shock to me to read that foreign governments were targeting community organizations to co-opt them, seeking to co-opt journalists, that political staffers are in their orbit of targets for foreign governments. I learned a lot from reading the unredacted report. So to that extent, on the scale of, was Mr. Singh more freaked out than I was freaked out? I mean, going in, I was really worried about, are my colleagues in Parliament people I can trust or not? Are they people Canadians can trust or not? I'm more alarmed about other aspects of society that I didn't realize foreign governments were targeting. I'm reassured, again, that current sitting members of Parliament have not, as I read it, committed acts that could be even within a good, fair country mile of treason.
Est-ce que depuis votre sortie, Madame May, il y a quelqu'un qui vous a contacté pour exprimer des préoccupations ou des mises en garde ou des questions par rapport à la portée de vos propos, que ce soit de diverses instances du comité, du SCRS ou toute autre instance qui vous aurait contacté justement pour revenir sur ce que vous avez dit la semaine dernière?
Non, pas actuellement, mais peut-être. Je suis ouvert à toutes les conversations comme ça.
Avez-vous des préoccupations personnellement à justement aller trop loin ou vous êtes confiante que ce que vous dites ne mettra pas en péril autre chose?
Je pense que dans les prochains jours, peut-être, la situation a changé déjà le moment quand j'ai lu le rapport. M. Singh a le lu. Maintenant, M. Blanchet, c'est dans le processus. Au commencement de cette controverse, avec le rapport de M. Johnson, M. Blanchet a eu la même position que M. Poilievre. C'est possible pour les chefs des partis en l'opposition de faire un changement de leur position. Pour moi-même, j'ai hâte pour le moment de travailler ensemble dans une façon qui respecte la nature les rapports secrets et sécuritaires. I hope that's clear. I'm sorry. Did you want to add anything, Mike?
Le racisme environnemental, ça sera long. Le Bloc québécois et le Parti conservateur ont voté contre. Ça posait problème, racisme environnemental mis ensemble. En quelques secondes, qu'est-ce que vous avez à dire là-dessus sur le fait que des partis se sont opposés à ça?
Oui, mais il y a les différences dans les partis, évidemment, et les conservateurs, puis aussi le Bloc québécois, les députés ont voté contre le projet de loi. Mais je pense que dans le... Et c'est pas mon rôle de parler selon les députés du Bloc. Mais les députés du Bloc sont vraiment écolos. Et les députés du Bloc, le problème, c'est avec le mot racisme. Mais il n'est pas une seule question qu'il y a la situation avec les déchets toxiques dans les communautés autochtones. Il n'est pas une question de débat, c'est vraiment le cas. Pour les conservateurs, c'est dommage qu'ils n'aient pas pris le défi de justice environnementale. Mais maintenant, nous sommes dans quelques jours, ce projet de loi va devenir la loi du Canada et c'est pour le ministre de l'Environnement de préparer une stratégie et j'espère que les députés de Bloc et conservateurs, puis aussi les ONG sur le terrain vont engager et s'impliquer dans le processus pour une stratégie pour la justice environnementale. Moi-même, j'espère que notre stratégie canadienne pour la justice sociale ressemble la stratégie des États-Unis. I'm so impressed with the work that's been done by the Environmental Protection Agency since 1994 in giving disadvantaged communities, racialized and Indigenous communities, tools, funds, resources to have equal rights to a safe environment, safe drinking water, access to clean air, and not to accept a degraded environment because they lack political power. Merci tout le monde. Thank you.